very quickly introducing Torgeir, those of you who do not know him. He has a degree in aeronautics from MIT, and in 1992 he left university life. He was a professor at university in Iceland to head up as Director General of the Icelandic Civil Aviation Administration. After a number of years and successes there, the Icelandic government took the decision to divide the administration into the regulatory organization and the corporate company that is now known as Isavia, which Torgeir heads.
Thank you, Eugene, and good afternoon, everyone. In the program, I'm termed guest speaker, and I must admit, I don't know what a guest speaker is doing in the middle of a trial proceedings, quite frankly. Am I here to say something totally different to make you forget this entertaining lecture that we heard from Eamon and a very clear and logical presentation by Dieter, or what? No, in fact, I choose to, well, I'm not an entertainer, so I'm not going to be entertaining you during these few minutes. I had prepared a long lecture, of course, having been a professor at the university on the aspects of cost recovery. I'm not going to deliver that. I'm going to give you a few aspects of cost recovery, though, and start by saying, if cost recovery is dead, I think we are all dead. I mean, any business needs to recover its cost. Isn't that fairly clear? Now, Dieter chose to use traditional cost recovery, so he modified that a little bit. I hope that will be actually the line that will be taken in these proceedings, because after all, any business needs to cover its cost. In the long run, you become bankrupt if you do not. So that is clear. Well, cost recovery, we have been using that on the North Atlantic in the context of the joint financing agreement, which is a special thing that only Denmark and Iceland and ICAO know about, or understand at least. It's very simple. You determine what revenue you're going to be using in year I, and you take the estimated cost and you subtract from that any under or over recovery that you may have incurred in 2 years before, and you compute your unit charge. Very simple, very straightforward, very transparent, in as much as the costs are transparent in the first place. Now, looking at 18 years of our services on the North Atlantic, we see how cost recovery has actually worked out, and this is all in terms of percentages of the turnover. So you see we have had ups and downs. On the average, we are coming out zero, which is really what cost recovery is all about. And in the past about 10 years, we have had a standard deviation of 10% of the turnover, if you will. For the statistics buffs, this is not a stationary time series, so we just chose to take the last 10 years. And let's say that is not maybe untypical, that we have about 10% of the turnover up or down. This depends, of course, on the business from one ANSP to another. Okay, well, if you put this on a normal cost recovery, you have a probability of deficit, which is 50%, or a probability of profit, which is 50%. I mean, what kind of a business is this? No one would do a market business on that basis of having an equal possibility or probability of losing and making a profit. So the only way we can live with that is that there is a certain mechanism called cost recovery, which makes sure that we come out not with a loss in the end. In the end, we come out with no loss and no profit. If we were to take a risk, we would have to take that into account, which has actually been mentioned by one of the previous speakers. So what I would like to do is to talk a little bit about the management of risk, because I will make the statement that financial risk of an ANSP must remain low, and I think there have already been arguments provided here in this forum for that. Of course, the higher the risk, the higher will be the charges to the user. It's as simple as that. Cost recovery reduces the risk of the ANSP to practically zero. Of course, there is nothing called zero risk, and it, of course, is the user that assumes the risk. And so that is a good the good support for Eamon's argument that this is absolutely a marvelous model. So what do we do if we have risks? We have to increase our revenue beyond costs. And the question becomes, how do we do that? How are we sure that we have enough, have gone enough into the right direction? In other words, that we have increased our revenues sufficiently to reduce the probability of having a loss. I'm showing you this in this instance that we increase very simply, our revenue about 10%, which means our unit charge by about 10%, and we have a probability of deficit, which is of 16%. Well, some might argue, okay, that's great, that's all right, that is enough. Others might say, this is a very risky business, that is not enough, so we might have to go further. If we did not, of course, if we went the other way, we would have a probability of deficit which is much higher, and this is a reduction of price of 10%, which means that the probability of deficit is then 84%, totally unacceptable. So to be on the safe side, I would say in this instance, we would go to about 20% higher unit prices, and we would have the probability of deficit which was less than 2.5%. So in most years, we would be profitable. And this is what we have to face. The method of recovering costs prevents us from having to worry about that this risk business, although certainly we are moving that risk over to the users. The advantages, in other words, of the cost recovery scheme is that it has minimum financial risk for the ANSP. And you don't really have to take part in any hedging of setting user charges so that you come out on the right side. There is, hopefully, transparency of costs and charges, and we can do a lot more in that context. There is certainly less pressure to minimize costs, which is not all bad, because it means that the service level issues are not as heavy as they would be otherwise, and it encourages long-term investment. Disadvantages have been mentioned here. Less incentive for cost reduction. I will not subscribe to the view that there is no incentive for cost reduction. We wouldn't be fighting our air traffic controllers as much as we are doing if we did not have some incentive. And there are, of course, the fluctuations of charges that were clear from the original figures that I showed you for the 18 years. We can do improvements. There have been some mentioned already, stabilization funds, etc. Mid-year adjustments, possibly of the charges. And, of course, improved benchmarking of ANSP economic performance. So it is another unusual role, perhaps. I'm sorry that if I'm trying to influence the jury while the combatants are out. But clearly, my conclusion is there that the cost recovery method can be improved to take on board most of the shortcomings that have been identified with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Torgeir. Now I'm left sitting here alone, and that's not much of an entertainment. There we go. Okay. They're coming back into the room.